A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello there, my friends. I'm going to spend this time making a refutation of some of the key arguments within the present day secular, naturalist, atheist community. And there are many videos out on the internet where Muslims and Christians and any other theists debate those members of that community, the Neo-Atheists. And I think I need to put on record my own refutation also, which I think you might find useful. Now, first of all, we need to get a few procedural or methodological ideas out of the way. You can't just proceed with an argument, because I've seen some arguments on the internet where it's basically just who can shout the loudest is the winner, or whoever can get the biggest lot of the most emotions whipped up in their followers, they win the debate. And obviously we must agree that winning an argument is not about who shouts the loudest, and neither is it about who gets the most people excited and clapping and cheering. So winning the argument is about presenting a reasoned response that makes sense and that appeals to the human mind. And I think nothing is going to appeal to everyone, but I think there is a concept of because we can certainly, you will agree with me that not all claims to truth are equally valid. Right? Think about that. Not all competing claims of truth are equally valid. If I, for example, say that trees grow because there are genies feeding these trees, and these genies are invisible, and that is my explanation of why trees grow. And somebody else comes along and shows data about how trees convert carbon dioxide into oxygen and how the roots function, then obviously that explanation is more valid. And in fact, what I'm referring to is a concept called judgmental rationality, and it's a concept that is used that I've alluded to in my own writing, and I refer to I cite Roy Bhaskar in this, who draws a distinction. I just read from the text here. Roy Bhaskar draws a distinction between epistemic relativism, i.e., that all knowledge is temporally and spatially situated, and on the other side, judgmental relativism, that all knowledge is temporally and spatially situated, and judgmental relativism, which takes epistemic relativism to the perverted extreme, of seeing all truth claims as being equally valid. To counter this excess, which is clear in excess, and we know, from our book, from the Quran, that we are not a people of excess. We are the people that tread the balanced and the fair ground. Critical realists adopt the assumption that certain versions of truth can be shown to have greater rational explanatory power than others. This is referred to as judgmental rationality. So that's one of the first points I want to get out of the way, right, before I offer you my refutation of the popular atheists' arguments. Right, so judgmental rationality means that not all truth claims are equally valid. There are some that are more valid, and generally the way that you would test the greater validity of a truth claim is not by counting heads, but by looking at the groundswell of scholarly consensus or understanding. And so, for example, if the scholarly fraternity would have a consensus on a particular issue, let's say on the origin of the universe, on the Big Bang, then that would amount to a form of a consensus. But surely we're not just going to look at the numbers, we will look at the depth and the quality of the arguments also. So that's the first point. Then the second point. A lot of the atheists, modern day neo-atheists, like Richard Dawkins, and I can't even think, Silverman, what's that guy that's like the pro-Israel guy also. Anyway, I'll get to their names. Many of them, I think Dawkins is a prime example. Coincidentally, also from my neck of the woods, would you believe that? Richard Dawkins, I believe he's a Rhodesian, ex-Rhodesian, so he comes from Southern Africa. But let's look at his approach. You see, Richard Dawkins is a typical advancer of logical positivism. Logical positivism. And logical positivism is the position that by using empirical investigations and by using logical, deductive, inductive reasoning, all sorts of logical reasoning, we are, as human beings, able to arrive at a perfectly objective understanding of reality. That's pretty much what logical positivism amounts to. It is like you can have the same amount of certainty that you have in mathematics. Let's say in mathematics there's a position that the theorem of Pythagoras. If you take that kind of certainty that you get in mathematics, all these mathematical laws, what the logical positivist argues for, or the assumption, what the pre-assumption that they approach all scholarship with, is that you can, by applying empirical methods and applying deductive and inductive reasoning, you can arrive at an objective and certain description or understanding of reality. And so what Richard Dawkins does is, and what Darwinism really amounts to, is using the empirical evidence, the fossil evidence, going back millions and millions of years of all life, and analyzing these fossils, and from that drawing some inferences. And the main inference that Darwinism, or which Richard Dawkins is a modern day proponent of, the main inference that they arrive at is structures or findings such as natural selection. So they place the idea of natural selection behind the way that life has evolved. Not only animal life, but also plant life. And so natural selection, I'm not going to go into it, you're welcome to go and read up on it, is pretty much what they advance as truth, as the way in which species came about. Right, so I'm still busy with the second point, and I'm telling you what logical positivism is. It means that we, or scientists, or the scholar, can by analyzing the evidence, by using the data, which is in this case evolution, fossils, remnants, that you can come to an exact and objective description of what reality is. And that is pretty much an example of how logical positivism works. Now, most of Western scholarship over the centuries, over the past 3 or 4 centuries, starting with the Enlightenment in Europe, was based on logical positivism, right? So the European scientists, such as initially Descartes, Frenchman, the early scientists and mathematicians, Sir Isaac Newton, the British scientist and mathematician. All of these scientists had in common that science is about inferring certain objective rules and understandings by using the evidence and by using logical and rational inferences from the evidence. Now, the point I want to make is that this type of logical positivist argumentation has in fact been very, very soundly refuted already, and I'm not going to do it here now. You see, the problem with logical positivism is that it takes the arrogant view that the observer, that the scientist, that the scholar, that the subject is completely invisible and can be discounted within the laboratory or within the process of sampling and analyzing the data. So the refutation of logical positivism has been done very, very effectively along the grounds that the one who does the sampling, who does the inference, who draws the conclusions, are integrally involved or are indicted or enmeshed in the study. And that the study is not innocent, pure, and independent. Any study, any investigation, any scholarly investigation done by any individual necessitates that individual some involvement in some other way. Now let me give you an example, practical example. Go and look up the Hawthorne experiments conducted in the United States, I think somewhere in the 1960s or 70s, I'm not sure. You know, the Hawthorne experiments, this is my memory of this particular story, is an experiment that was conducted in a factory or an office or a workplace in America somewhere. Let's say it was a factory, an assembly plant. The aim of the study was to consider the effect that the brightness in a room has on productivity. So the amount of light that was in the workspace, the study aimed to identify to what extent that the amount of light affects productivity, the amount of work that people produce. And the Hawthorne experiments were conducted over a period, and you would have the guy with a white coat on the board coming around, and they would have a test group and a control group. So the test group, and this is the way empirical, logical, positivist research is done. You have a control group, you have a test group. And the test group was actually the group that had more lighting, right? So they had more brightness in their workspace. The control group had less lighting. They were in a slightly darker working environment. Right, and then and they had pre-data, right? So they have data about productivity. So they knew how much each of the workers used to put out in terms of on the assembly line, how much of these gadgets or widgets they could produce. The interesting discovery from the Hawthorne experiments is, what do you think? What do you think? Did light create more productivity? You think about it. Did a lighter environment create more productivity, or the darker environment? You see, so the final results of the Hawthorne experiments was that the guys with the white coats and with the clipboards, they did their studies in the test group and in the control group. And lo and behold, the group where there was more light, they actually were much more productive than the pre-data before the test was done, or the study was done, the experiment was done. So the light definitely showed there was more productivity. They just produced more widgets. They did more work for the day. But the ridiculous problem with this Hawthorne experiment is that when they measured those with lower light who were also studied, the control group, their productivity also went up by the same amount from previous data. So their productivity went up by a similar amount. And this bamboozled the investigators, the researchers, because, I mean, everyone's productivity went up. Of course, now we know why this was the case. Because we now know that the productivity did not go up because of the light, but because of the observers being present in the workplace. So the guys with the white coats and with the clipboards, they caused the productivity to go up. And that was the explanation. And so it killed the idea of the method used to conduct that experiment was then shown to be really invalid and unreliable, because the observer was influencing the behavior of the subject. Do you get what I'm saying? So logical positivism still, and there are many of them still, like Richard Dawkins, they are adamant that the observer is independent from the outcome of the experiment, and we cannot any longer accept it. You know, we live in a time where Eurocentrism, where Orientalism, where the European's elevation of his own worth is raised to such an extent that he is the neutral, objective observer in any study. And so Eurocentric research and scholarship has been effectively refuted, not by me, but by people that are much more prominent and greater scholars than me, like Edward Said, in his book Orientalism, a very effective refutation of how the Western mind affords itself the power of pure neutrality and pure objectivity, which is a fallacy. And so the idea of logical positivism, to which people like Dawkins are fervent adherents to, has been refuted, that we simply cannot discount the role that the scholar and the observer has in formulating or in arriving at his or her inferences. You have to accommodate for the biases and for the worldview and for the predisposition of the scholar, of the scientist, of the investigator. You know, when you come to quantum physics, and then it's even more proven that the observer's role is not irrelevant in the process. You know, the positioning of the electron, then, you know, if you look at Schrodinger's equations and the Heisenberg uncertainty principles, then the state or the positioning of an electron is determined by the observer. And there is no way of giving a definitive positioning of the electron in Hilbert space, in the space where the electron occurs. And so again, the subjectivity or the involvement of the observer is relevant in determining the positioning of the electron in quantum physics. So I've given you two examples, of that the pure independence, objectivity of the scholar is no longer accepted in scholarship globally. So that leaves us with a middle path. And that middle path is the path that we as critical realists or transcendental realists, which is the scholarship approach, the paradigm which I assume in approaching any research. In transcendental realism or critical realism, we tread the path where we believe that there is something called relative understandings of what is true, but that there are objective and useful ways of distinguishing more worthy or more valid explanations of reality from less valid explanations. So clearly, with some explanations, you can have a nonsensical explanation, and we cannot hold that to the same standard. Like, for example, I'm going to be contentious now, but we are here to learn. Those who argue that the world was created in 7 days, 7 earthly days, if you look at the science, if you look at the evidence, it clearly does not tally with reality. It is not possible for the earth to have come about in 1 day, for example. We know now that the earth was created over a period. It was the coagulation of cosmic gas that resulted in the creation or the formation of planets. And clearly that explanation is less valid than the explanation given in modern cosmology. And so for me to reject the cosmological arguments in the way that the earth and the sun and objects in space or in the universe came about, I would clearly, in terms of judgmental relativism, I would clearly favor those explanations to the creation in 7 days. Now, yes, you might say, but how does that affect your belief in Allah, in God? And you know what? I need to accommodate my belief in God, and which is encrypted or reflected in the holy text. I need to always go back to that text and see how does the science, the study, the investigation of scientists, how does it tally with the Quran? And in no way do I find a contradiction between the modern day scientific understanding of cosmology and the Quran, except with one exception that those people have a different idea of how the whole process originated. Right. So I think I've given you enough of the upfront ideas or conditions that I want to, or assumptions that I want to list before I proceed with the arguments. So let's go to the arguments. Right. Like the first argument that I want to deal with is the argument that Dawkins and others have that there is no God, or Krauss. I'm not sure what his name is, but Krauss, the guy who is a mathematical cosmologist of some sort. They come with the understanding that the world comes from nothingness, right? And so he wrote a book, in fact, Something from Nothing. And this is the first argument of the atheist, that the world is the product of nothingness. And how they produce, and this guy Krauss, the book that he wrote, basically, I haven't read the book. I've seen the synopsis and the write-ups and the overviews of the book. And I think the point that come out, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, is that at a very small quantum, sub-quantum, I don't know, level, they are able to observe particles coming into being out of nothing. So subatomic particles have been observed to being able to come into existence and out of existence within a laboratory.
If you take empty space, and that means get rid of all the particles, so there's nothing there. If that nothing weighs something, then it contributes a term like this. Now, that sounds ridiculous. Why should nothing weigh something? Nothing is nothing. The answer is nothing isn't nothing anymore. In physics, because of the laws of quantum mechanics and special relativity, on extremely small scales, nothing is really a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles that are popping in and out of existence in a time scale so short you can't see them. Now again, that sounds like philosophy, like counting the number of angels on the head of a pin, or religion, or something.
Right. So they extrapolate from that, because they've observed it, that a particle can come into existence out of its own. And because it can happen at a quantum level, at a particle, at a subatomic level, it makes it then plausible, or it makes it possible that the same could be the case for the origin of the universe, where there is nothing, where it is just nothingness or space. It is possible for a particle to come into existence, and that proves that the universe could have popped into existence at some point in the past. Now, that argument is weak, because, you see, first of all, it has the prejudice of the observer firmly entrenched in it. The logical positivist fallacy, the fallacy that all views on reality are, that any view on reality that is based on empirical study and deduction and induction is 100% correct. First of all, it comes with that fallacy, which is what we call the ontological fallacy. Right? And it makes this absurd claim that our understanding of reality is the same as reality. So it makes the absurd claim, Krauss and his ilk, Dawkins, they make the absurd claim that their understanding of reality is reality. So they conflate what they have developed or created in their minds, the understanding that they have arrived at is reality, and that is what we call the ontological fallacy. You cannot conflate your understanding of reality with reality. In fact, the Quran speaks about this fallacy. Look at this verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "It is so that you are the type of people that fall into dispute about matters known to you. But how can you fall in dispute about matters that are unknown to you? Be aware that Allah knows while you lack knowledge." That's a very powerful verse. It's a very powerful verse. It's a warning to those who mistake their understanding of truth as truth. Imagine if we could all just have a little bit more humility and say that our understanding is our best attempt at what reality really is, but it's not reality. And that is the humility that we need to have, right? So first of all, this is the mistake that Krauss and Dawkins make, is that when they make the claim that something from nothing is possible because it's in a laboratory, they are committing the same sins that logical positivists have committed over the centuries. And they forget that their predisposition is towards atheism. And they come to the experiment with the idea of an atheist. But also just purely from science, the laboratory, the space that they claim is a space that is a void, is not the primordial universe before the Big Bang. Because you cannot imagine space before the Big Bang. What is nothingness? Is nothingness an empty box? No. You see, nothingness cannot be created in a laboratory. Nothingness, the absence of anything, is more than an empty box, or it is less than an empty box. It is less even than a vacuum, because in a vacuum there's still space, there's dimensions. So you need to reduce the air, you need to reduce the particles, or remove the particles, remove the air, but then you need to remove the literal space, the dimensions, and you come to a point of singularity. The world before the Big Bang is not an empty space, my friends. It's not even a point existence. We are unable to imagine nothingness. It's an unimaginable state. Nothingness, where there is no space, where there is no dimensions, where there is no breadth, width, where there is not even a point existence, is unfathomable. And so Dawkins and Krauss, when they come with the experiment of something from nothing in a laboratory, they are ridiculously trying to equate the pre-Big Bang existence or reality with that empty laboratory space that they create. It's not the same. It's not the same. That space they've created can never be empty because it has dimensions. And so that argument, something from nothing, let us apply judgmental relativism to that argument. Let us then try and see which explanation makes more sense. Having a nothingness, which is not even a point, there's no dimensions, or having a creator, which is the position that we as Muslim scientists advance, or theistic scientists. I'm going to count into my ranks also any Christian, Jewish, whatever, all those who are theistic in their outlook. Our argument for cosmogony, or the origin of the universe, or the origin of the cosmos, is that there is an intelligent mind at work, and before there was anything, before there was a universe, before there was even a point existence, there was the intelligent divine originator of the universe. Now, if you use judgmental relativism, you need to tell me which one has more appeal, which one has less subjectivity in, because we as pre-believers, yes, but we're explaining. I'm not adamant about the Muslim God or the Christian God, although my positionality is as a Muslim scientist. I fully embrace and fully endorse the Christian scientists' argument, or the Jewish scientists' argument, who embrace the idea of the Big Bang. Like, for example, what is his name? Like Keith Ward, for example. Right, so in terms of judgmental relativism and in terms of transcendental realism, we argue that there is something beyond the visible or the empirically verifiable, and we accommodate that causes can be ascribed beyond what is necessarily empirical and experienced by the human sense, by any human sense. See, this brings me to a further critique and a further refutation of the arguments of these atheists. See, the question I have for them is that, are there certain phenomena, mechanisms, causal factors that exist that have not been discovered by man? Are there causal factors, phenomena, mechanisms in the universe present that have not yet been discovered? Obviously, yes. I mean, if you go back 100 years, there were things that were discovered now that we never knew existed then. And the discovery of new phenomena or mechanisms or causal factors in the universe is an ongoing process. You know, the God particle, the Higgs boson was not, nobody knew about the Higgs boson 100 years ago. But now we know that the Higgs boson exists. It's a particle that exists at the quantum level that gives the quality of mass to all objects or to other particles. So without the Higgs boson, there would be no mass, no factor such as mass. And so we can now identify the cause behind mass, which is the Higgs boson. It's an explanation that was discovered recently in the last 20 years or 15 years. And so the answer to these scientists or to these atheist scientists is yes, you do get phenomena, you do get mechanisms, you get causal factors and objects in the universe that are not yet known or discovered. Right. So how can they make such lofty claims that they have identified? Because to say you're an atheist means that you have drawn the conclusion that there are no further or transcendent or greater causes to any reality in the universe than what we already know. It is putting a cap on any further discovery. And it's another nonsensical position that these atheists advance, is that there is no new discoveries to be made. Meanwhile, in the last 10, 15 years, we made a massive discovery, the Higgs boson. And they're saying, no, there's nothing new to be discovered. So the fact of the matter is that there are many things that are still to be discovered. There are many mechanisms, there are many structures in the universe, in the cosmos, that will still be discovered. And so for somebody to make the lofty claim now that we have drawn the conclusion as to the origin of the universe and we've explained it, something from nothing is the explanation, that is such a foolish position. And you know what? To a large extent, my belief is that atheism is no longer science. It is a fifth religion. It is the new Western religion. Scientism is the religion of the West, and it's actually a modified version of Christianity. It's a modified version of the white man is right. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say it. I'm not a racist. Doesn't come from a racist place. It's the same type of view that you see when the colonialists came, when the colonizers came to my land, to this part of the world, where my predecessors came as slaves and my other predecessors were the Khoisan, because that is my heritage, is Khoisan, Malay and Indian. And my previous African Khoisan forefathers, they experienced a white man who told them that the Bible is absolutely correct and that it is the Word of God. It is the Word of God, and by the Word of God is signals it is the unquestionable truth, because that is really what they mean by it is the word of God. It is the unquestionable truth. They told my forefathers, my ancestors, that when they arrived on the shores here and they shot their way with cannons into this country and took charge of it and took ownership of it with musket guns and with cannons. Today, Richard Dawkins and Krauss and all these guys are making the same claim. They omit the idea of God, but they make the claim that what they say is absolutely right and beyond question. And that is the claim of modern scientism. And that is why I say scientism, the religion of the atheists, they believe that science is unquestionably correct, is just another cult. They wouldn't like to know this, but it is just another cult. It is a reborn Christianity. It is a reborn Christianity where we are right and our words cannot be questioned. And those who are Christian, William Lane Craig, all these other scholars, theistic scholars, etc., William and others, they are actually less fundamentalist Christian than the scientists. And by Christian I mean Catholic, Orthodox, because that is what they are. They are promoting orthodoxy, one way, which is the right way. That is the idea of orthodoxy. And orthodoxy says that my way or the highway. And that is exactly what Dawkins and Krauss, these guys are promoting their own orthodox understanding of the origin of the world and the origin of the universe. And what I've shown you is that, first of all, the experiment is flawed and weak. Number two, their claims are unreasonable given that discoveries are ongoing and that they have already drawn conclusions. It's almost like saying, I'm going to do a study on the humans of the world and all the people of the world, right? This is the exact same analogy of their arrogance. I'm going to study the humans of the world and I'm going to draw conclusions, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sample of my neighbors, all the 5 or 10 homes around me. I'm going to have a survey and ask them questions about how, anything about them. And I'm going to extrapolate on my neighbors, the 10 neighbors I have around me. I'm going to make certain claims about all the people of the world. Now that's a ridiculous exercise, isn't it? It's a crazy, ridiculous exercise. How could anyone even imagine to put any value in a study such as that? Let's go to another argument that the modern day atheist employs. It is very common, and that is the multiverse theory. So the multiverse theory is based on the idea that when the idea of the something from nothing is rejected, because if something could come from nothing, then many things could come from nothing. You see, if something was able to pop into existence from nothing, then why would it only happen once? And then what the modern day atheist, neo-atheist argues for then is that, no, but that is why there is the theory of the multiverse. There are universes popping into existence all over the place, everywhere. Now, let me first say that if our universe is the extent of our own experience, if we can only experience our universe, because it would be physically, in terms of how we define a universe as a space-time entity, right? If it is a self-contained space-time entity, then, and we are space-time bound creatures, then logically we are captured and confined. Our experience is confined to this universe. And so the first problem with the multiverse is we will never ever be able to attain or obtain any experience or any empirical information about any other universe. And so the idea of a multiverse will forever only become a speculative position. It is only a position that we can speculate from within our space-time bound reality. And so the idea of a multiverse is something that is only in the minds of Krauss and Dawkins and whoever else of the ilk. Which is crazy, because what they are then postulating is the same that I'm arguing for a being that resides or that is present at a transcendent place or time outside of our reference point, outside of our space-time reality. Can you see what I'm saying? I'm saying that you are basically trying to get the same speculative, you are using your speculative powers to infer something that is non-intelligent, i.e. other universes, and I'm using my speculative powers or my ability to speculate to infer an intelligent extra cosmic existence. Your speculation is leading you to a non-intelligent extra cosmic or extra universal existence. And once again, I'm going to use judgmental relativism to say that me speculating that there is an intelligent being outside of our frame of reference just makes more sense than your speculation that it is an unintelligent. I mean, why would you give yourself the right to speculate and not me the right to speculate? What we are doing is we are speculating, yes, but I've just got simply more evidence to support my speculation. I mean, I've got an intelligent world that I'm looking at. I've got an intelligent myself. I represent intelligence, and so it is more plausible that the ancient or primordial position is one that contains intelligence and is not a pure material, unthinking, unfeeling reality. And so the multiverse is at least as implausible as the God argument. You know, if you want to be fair, then you must say that the multiverse, if you are an atheist about God, you should be an atheist about the multiverse, because there is no empirical evidence for it. It's a speculative position. And that is the second argument of these people that I welcome them, please post a video. Tell me where I am wrong in my refutation. The final position of the new atheist that I want to refute or challenge is the idea of randomness, of the place of randomness within the origin or the creation or the origin of the universe according to them. And the argument goes that the universe popped into existence randomly, right? And that is the argument. And life started as a random event. The first organic molecule came about as a random event in the primordial earth with sufficient heat, water, lightning, electricity in the air. Those conditions created the chances or favored the creation of the first organic molecule, and then from the life evolved. And from the simplest form of life, from a single cell life form, the atheist argues, it took a random process of mutations of the genes to arrive at what we have today, the variety of life the animal kingdom, human beings themselves. And so all of that follows a random, it all hinges on random mutation at a genetic level of life. And given long enough time, these genetic mutations at a cellular level would, by the process of natural selection, because if let's say a creature or a living creature acquires a mutation that makes them more survivable in the world, that mutation will endure. For example, if a frog develops a less colorful skin in an environment where they are then less easily detected by predators, if a genetic mutation of a very dull brown colored skin or camouflaged skin, and we have many of those frogs here, in fact, the leopard toad, and then that frog will almost like be selected to survive in nature, and that gene will be naturally selected for endurance. It will endure. And the other bright color frogs, they'll die out because the birds who hunt these frogs will just simply see them easier. So the process of random mutation and natural selection, those are the two mechanisms that make up evolution. The problem is that, as scholars and mathematicians have found, is that you can actually calculate the odds. You can actually calculate the odds of those genetic mutations from occurring. Now remember, out of every 100,000 bad mutations, there will be one good mutation. So you can actually put statistical odds on a time or how long it will take for those mutations to take place. And once you have the odds, once you have the probability, you can then extrapolate using statistical sampling and using maybe an exponential distribution or a Poisson distribution. You can then extrapolate a time period that it will take for that mutation to actually take place. Now the problem is, what contemporary non-atheistic scientists have found is that the total number, it is 1 in 10 to the power 77. That is the total odds that it will require for a gene or for genes to have that kind of random changes that would lead to evolution, to the present day evolution. But the problem is that there was ever only 10 to the 40. The number of trials available to the evolutionary process corresponding to the total number of organisms is 10 to the 40. Do you get what we're saying here is that, let's look at this all. Given the empirical based estimates of rarity conservatively estimated by X3 at 1 in 10 to the 77th. So that is the rarity of how rare it would have been for anything to come about, and this is the total number of trials that are available since the existence of the earth. In simple terms, if we are to allow for random mutations, it would not take 4.6 billion years for life to have evolved. And that is the current scientific accepted position based on fossils, based on the empirical evidence, as that life evolved, or life started 4.6 billion years ago on this planet. But if we were to account for natural or for random mutations, it would not take 4.6 billion years. It would rather take 140 billion years for life to evolve, if at all we were to attach any sort of randomness to the process of evolution. And the point, the deduction that I'm coming to, or the inference that I'm drawing here, is that random mutation is disproved simply on the odds, simply on the statistical odds. And that's not me, that is existing scientists who are not religiously dedicated or committed or devoted to atheism. Because what atheism has become, it is a form of religious devotion to certain ideas. And Dawkins has become a religious leader, has become nothing different to the Muslim priest or the Catholic priest who is bent on defending the doctrines of his church. So I think I will conclude on that note and just summarize by saying that the three main arguments of modern day atheism is the idea of the multiverse, which is a silly, which they afford themselves the same privilege as me arguing for the God created universe. And why should they be preferenced? Why should they be privileged to argue for any transcendent existing reality to our known, empirically experienceable universe? Why do they get more right than me to postulate on things on a transcendent plane? You know, in fact, if we give ourselves the equal right to postulate the transcendent, then my postulation that an intelligent being is outside of this universe, or is above this frame of reference, and I believe I make more sense. Secondly, is the idea of something from nothing, which is clearly something which is postulated by making an inference from a laboratory experiment, and that there is no something, there is no nothing. If nothing is just an empty box, that is not nothing. And then also the idea of random mutation is also disproved, not by me, by science. And to conclude, what I believe that atheism is not so much a plausible position in terms of our own experience, in terms of our own reflection, in terms of our own intelligent pondering or study of the universe, but it is just simply a reaction to religion. It is the new atheist movement is a protest movement against rigid religion. It's a protest movement against religion. You know, there's a movement, what they call the Jesus deniers, those people who are, they call them mythicists. And these people deny the existence of Jesus Christ. Right? They deny the existence as a Professor Price, I think, and Singer, or is it now? I think Price is the one. And, you know, it's a protest movement against Christianity. So and then there's also some scholar that's arguing that Muhammad doesn't exist. So it's almost like the atheist movement it's a protest movement to invalidate God. So it's not a movement based on science and healthy reasoning and argumentation. It's really a gut reaction. It's an angry reaction to religion. And one of the prime examples of this anger, of this irrational outcry or outburst against religion is, and that is Sam Harris. And as you can see, he is the co-founder of Project Reason, whose aim is to encourage critical thinking and erode the influence of dogmatism, superstition, and bigotry in our world. But there's a sinister side also to these neo-atheists, and that is that, like for example, Sam Harris, very, very, very interestingly, he's a peculiar chap who argues that God doesn't exist, but then in the same vein argues that Israel is the chosen people of God, the Jews of Israel, and that Israel is legitimately belongs to the Jews because it was promised to them in the Bible. It's the ancestral biblical home. So, there's a sinister side to these atheists where they are not simply innocent objectives to dogma and to senseless rituals and senseless practices, but they do actually advance an agenda of Zionism in his case. Obviously, if people are advancing the cause of Zionism, then it is very possible that they could be advancing other sinister causes and using atheism for that reason. So the modern atheist movement is not an innocent movement. It is not untouched by political and even religious dogma themselves. They are not innocent adherents to science, but rather they display features of Scientism, where they are prepared to use the appearance or the pretense of science and the trappings of science and the methods of science to actually establish their own subjective ideas and understandings. I will conclude there. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.